Okay, everybody, let's get started. Our guest this evening is Doug Livingston, who is a journalist for the Beacon Journal here in Akron. And Doug, rather than reading your resume, as we usually do with our guests, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where you went to school, how you ended up with your current job?
All right, so I grew up in a rural town in the Mahoning Valley, which is kind of a deindustrialized region along the Pennsylvania border in eastern Ohio. I moved to Columbus, went to Ohio State for a little while, ran out of money, worked for a little while, went to Youngstown State, had to find a career for the rest of my life, built a lot of houses, flipped a lot of burgers, wanted to do something a little more, I guess, civic, a little more involved with the direction of society, and so I took a class on American journalism, fell in love with it, thought it was a profession that I could do for the rest of my life. Every day I'm talking to somebody different about something different, constantly learning, never an expert, never admitting that I'm an expert on anything. They don't give me a beat long enough to get to call myself an expert on anything. I interned for quite a few papers while I was a student at Youngstown State University. One of the intern gigs I got was at Ohio.com, which is the Akron Beacon Journal's website. That was back in 2012. They hired me that year, actually hired me in November. I graduated in December, which was awesome to have a job before you graduated, and even better to get a job in the journalism profession because they are few and far between these days. So I covered education for about 3 years, covered the State Board of Education, charter schools, quickly realized that there's a lot of politics wrapped into education, more than I ever thought. And then this year we thought it prudent to develop a political beat in and of itself. So I've been covering politics since January, not entirely by choice. I'm not sure if it's a curse or a blessing at this point. I just know that these next couple months are going to fly by, and you can really feel the intensity of the elections, everything ramping up, especially here in Ohio.
So you mentioned that you don't have a particular beat or haven't had a particular beat, but of all the different things you've done, which of those areas did you like the most?
I really enjoyed the education beat. When I interviewed at the Beacon Journal, I was interviewing for a data analyst, they call him a CAR reporter, computer-assisted reporter. I love numbers. I love Excel sheets. I could live in an Excel sheet. Drives my wife crazy, but sometimes I'll stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning just pivoting tables and crunching numbers. So I thought I was interning for something with numbers. Interviewing for something with numbers. Turns out I got an education job, which is so data rich and has become increasingly so since No Child Left Behind went into law in the early 2000s. So we have tests that test tests and more tests after that to make sure we tested everything correctly. So we have this post-test era generation, and it gives you really rich data, but it also raises some controversies about maybe some overreach.
Well, so tell us a little bit about the ICANN Ohio project, which is a project of Ohio media to try to cover the presidential election in Ohio differently than in the past.
And I think that was key. We wanted to do something differently. Obviously, newspapers don't carry the clout that they once did. Editorials don't carry the clout that they once did. I've heard candidates say we don't even respond to surveys because there's only something to lose and nothing to gain. So we want to do something different with limited resources, and we thought that we could get other newspapers to buy into this idea of using rich data from polling that would represent the people's interests and concerns, and not necessarily let the campaigns swoop into Ohio and craft the message that they believe Ohioans should care about, which often happens. These campaigns in Ohio are staffed by people who don't live in Ohio. They have daily polling, daily data that tells them what are the wedge issues, where can we peel off a couple voters, where can we grab some undecided voters, how can we just drive a negative message that is going to resonate with our opponents' support to the point where they may not even vote at all. So the ICANN project really is based on the polling that the Bliss Institute and Dr. Green are performing, and we're taking that polling data to prioritize the concerns of Ohioans, dig into the issues, having a lot of deliberative discussions with the Jefferson Center from Minnesota, trying to listen to the public about what they want from us. And it's kind of a duh question. They want the facts. They don't want anything fancy. They want the issues. They want where the candidates fall on the issues. So we're really, everything is kind of anchored to the polling data. Trying not to cover the horse race. Most people think of polls, they think of who's ahead, Trump or Clinton, who's ahead, Portman, Strickland. Those are your typical horse race questions. I'm sure you're all familiar with polling, how it works. What's interesting about the ICANN data is John asked a very open-ended question. What is your concern? What is bothering you? To 1,000 Ohioans back in April and May. And we got 1,000 different responses. Nobody's going to do that kind of poll in America. I think Gallup does it on a pretty regular basis, but Gallup's got the money to do it. Nobody does it in Ohio. It takes a lot of work to sift through those answers, make sense of them, categorize them, and then kind of churn them out in a way that reporters are going to look at and say, I can do a story off of this. Reporters are so busy, if it doesn't make sense to them, they're going to kind of gloss over it and skip off onto the next thing. So part of the goal, I guess one of the obstacles is making sense of the data, making sense of the information, letting it guide our reporting.
From your perspective, what's the most surprising thing that's come out of the ICANN project so far?
The discussed data peaking this year was an early indicator of, the love lost for our presidential candidates. That was eye-opening. Being able to go back and survey these folks 3 times is very important, because we can determine what the issues are, and then we can break down and say, all right, we've now prioritized the issues for Ohio. Let's see what the whole state thinks about one particular topic. And we dug into the discussed data, tried to figure out, well, if so many people dislike Hillary Clinton, what is it about her character or her issues that they don't like? If so many people don't like Trump, what is it about his issues and his character? So the polling data really, I'm not sure if there's any one headline-grabbing thing that came out of it. It's just the rich context that it gives us, which is so seriously lacking in journalism, especially in, I think, presidential election coverage.
Yeah, the discussed data that Doug just mentioned is, we've probably talked about it here in this class, but it's a 10-point scale, where people are asked on a scale from 1 to 10, where 10 means you're really satisfied, and 1 means you're really disgusted with national politics. Where would you place yourself? And we've actually asked that at the Bliss Institute for a long time, back into the 1990s. And well, I guess we could say it peaked, but we could also say it cratered this year, right? People are just really, kind of across the political spectrum. People are disgusted with the political process. So yeah. I thought that was kind of interesting too.
And having that data, being able to say, all right, of the 60% of Ohioans who think the country is off track, who are they? How old are they? How much money do they make? Are they educated? Where do they live? That's information that we often get fed in a printout from a pollster or a polling company. We'll get like a one-pager, and then the good polls usually have the verbatim questions and the percent responses. I actually get to stick my hands into the data and twist it around and really find some unique things and explore those and pursue them either locally or with our partners across the state.
Well, I know it's probably too early to tell, but do you think the project's had any effect on the candidates and how they behave?
No. No, I think it would take a much more concerted effort to have an impact on the candidates. with the backing of the Toledo Blade, the Cincinnati Enquirer, the Dispatch was on board, the Canton Repository. We had quite a few of the biggest newspapers in Ohio behind us, and we posed questions that we thought were the most important to Ohioans when the campaigns came through in the primary. And the Clinton campaign dismissed it. The Trump campaign gave us about 3 paragraphs. That's been one frustrating part. But I'm not writing for the candidates. When I write, I could write about an issue and not even mention the candidate, and I'd be happy. As long as people understand the issue a little bit better, and if they understand how the campaigns are using particular issues, I think that's more important than a campaign or a candidate, giving you their boilerplate response.
Well, Doug, tell us about what you all found out on trade, how Ohioans feel about trade.
Well, trade is not nearly as important to Ohioans as poverty or jobs. But we don't have a lot of historical data on where trade falls, and it's been an issue that's been raised by Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump throughout the past year. We do know that trade tends to be a concern raised by people in northern Ohio, where industrial was once king. We used to have rubber in Akron, steel in Youngstown. The big 3 automotive really propped up northwest Ohio until the early 2000s, when manufacturing started to disappear. So we know that baby boomers are more likely to cite trade as an issue. More people are likely to cite trade as a solution to a problem than an actual problem, which tells me that somebody's offering trade as a solution. They're hearing somewhere that trade is the evil that's causing their financial woes. So it's also an issue that seems to resonate with moderates and conservatives more than Democrats or liberals. But it's also, from the data, a wedge issue. It's one that transcends really party. It's one that could get a Republican candidate to appeal to a disaffected blue-collar Democratic worker. So it's been a critical issue this election, and I think it's been given more prominence by the campaigns than the people of Ohio would have expected.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I found really, really surprising, is because if you listen to the candidates, and even in the debate the other night, there's so much talk about trade. You would have thought that a very large number of Ohioans were really upset about that issue. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's a much smaller number. Now, that's not to say that there weren't legitimate concerns there. It's just that the campaigns have made it much more important mm-hmm. than the voters have made it. Well, before we open it up to questions, Doug, and I know you may want to ask our assembled group here and in Columbus some questions too, and we'll give you a chance to do that. But as a journalist, how do you cover something like a presidential debate like we saw on Monday night?
Well, if I worked for the Post or the Times or CNN, I would probably be there with an army of fact checkers back at the office, researchers, editors. With the smaller staff that we have at the Beacon Journal, I kind of struggled with how do we cover this debate. I walked out on the street and asked people ahead of time what do they really want to hear. It turns out they just want to hear something positive and something truthful. Truth is in the eye of the beholder, so not really sure how to interpret that. So the debate night, we decided we would send one reporter out to wherever the Summit County Republicans were hanging out, and we would send one reporter to wherever the Summit County Democrats were hanging out, and just kind of flood Twitter with their reactions, and then bring it together and let the national media do the analysis and all the stay up all night and figure out what it all meant work. So that was our local plan, but obviously the resources you have available, I think, dictate what you can do in terms of the depth of your coverage.
When you watch something like the debate, what do you look for? Does it depend on sort of a preconceived notion of what like a story you want to write, or you just kind of let the themes and the stories emerge from watching the candidates talk?
You know, we always try and just be a clean slate of, you know, a mirror of what's happening. It was difficult to do that in a room full of Democrats Monday night. I will have to say, I hope that the public understands where I was in the context of what I was reporting out. I know oftentimes some of the thoughts and feelings of the people that I write about get put on me. I don't always share those thoughts and feelings. But in terms of covering, you know, the debate, and you know, I'd like to pull out the issues that I think I'm going to write about. So, you know, tomorrow I'm walking through South Akron with a barbershop owner to talk to black voters about why they may or may not vote this year. So the middle chunk on race relations and some of the questions from Lester Holt pressing Donald Trump on the birther stuff and talking about how do we heal a divided nation, that's important to me. So I'm more listening for what are they saying and how does that fold into issues-based reporting that I'm already doing. I never let the campaigns really drive the stories that I write. In fact, I've written stories about how campaigns like to manipulate reporters, just because at one point in the election I got sick of really all the half-truths and the BS emails that I was getting from some of the campaigns, giving you ultimatums and deadlines and saying, you know, if you want this, it's yours. If not, I'll give it off. I'll give you until the end of the week, and then I'm going to give it to another reporter. Well, you're not going to press me into doing a story until I figure out whether it's, you know, of the public's interest. It's been vetted. I can figure out what axe you're trying to grind, and then start digging in and doing the research.
Jerry, do you have a question for Doug?
Given the fact that as you said, you let the national folks basically write about the campaign, but did you went out in the street and you asked people what were they looking for? And I think you said they said they were looking for something positive.
Yes.
You asked them, do you think that negative attack ads should be used? They would say no, but you know they work, and you know that's why they keep using them. So I think you know one of the things that happens is that people will tell you not what they really feel because they don't want to reveal that they actually want to see these two candidates, you know, mix it up, or that they like attack ads or anything like that. But I guess I'm coming to one of the questions is that, and I know you've been doing this a long time, but where do you see, are we going to have newspapers in this town in 5 years or 6 years or less? I mean, where do you see the future of newspaper business?
That's a pretty heavy question. I don't know. I'm more critical than most people in our newsroom of how our newspaper has or has not pivoted in the digital age. I think our core readership is an aging demographic. They are people who pick up and read the newspaper religiously every single day. The majority of news consumers moving up, including this huge kind of surge of a millennial population, you have to catch them. You have to go to them. Newspapers don't show up on their front doorstep. The news shows up on Twitter and Facebook, which kind of, you know, also comes with a lot of misinformation. So if I had to say where we're going to be in 5 years, I think we will be much more digitally oriented. We are in the process of kind of updating our digital presence so that we can provide readers with interactive features. You know, if a candidate says something on Twitter, that tweet needs to be right there in the story. You see this a lot. We don't do that. If a statistic is in a story and it's just kind of a glossed over according to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, well, no, we're going to link to that document, maybe annotate that document, have it available. That's really where our newspaper needs to be in 5 years to remain relevant.
Let me just follow up on that, because the question that you raised about if a candidate says something on Twitter, it needs to be in the article. This is not my forte, but how do you question the candidate about what they said on Twitter if you're just reporting what they said on Twitter? Doesn't it take away the face-to-face contact or the phone call contact of getting a response from somebody? How do you do that with Twitter? I don't understand how that works.
I think it was a misunderstanding. I'm not saying we replace the tenets of journalism with the ease and access of Twitter. I'm not going to replace an interview with a tweet. We still call the campaign. We still shoot a tweet back. We still send an email, and we explain that we did everything we could to respond or pose a couple questions to the candidate. But we get, without the original source easily accessed by the reader, there is that loss of credibility. We need to lean on the original sourcing as much as possible in this age of a million websites and news outlets, and this diminishing trust that the public has in traditional journalism. So that was more of a sourcing issue, not necessarily replacing an interview. And another thing, back to the presidential campaign, there's an issue of access with local newspapers. So your Ohio newspapers, even your biggest Ohio newspapers, have trouble getting a policy advisor or somebody who's really close to Hillary Clinton or really close to Donald Trump or close to the people who are telling them what to say. So the hierarchy of news is that information is leaked to the Washington papers or the Times, whether in LA or New York, and then it kind of trickles down to everybody else. So there's an issue of access from a local perspective.
And the Beacon Journal, if I'm not correct, does not have a Washington bureau or a Columbus bureau?
No, we don't. No, I was I try as much as possible to keep one eye on Columbus and one eye on Northeast Ohio, and you end up getting cross-eyed and you miss a lot of things. We no longer have Ohio, but we do pull wire stories. We depend on the AP. I've reached out to journalists at other newspapers for an extra set of eyes somewhere else, or to broaden the geographical reach of an issue that's not really heard of in our profession. It's kind of cutthroat, very competitive. No, we are it.
We'll go to Lloyd. Lloyd has a question, just saying, but I just want to say one thing. Doug, when I've been a source for a journalist here in Ohio for a long time, and it used to be insulting to say to somebody from outside of Ohio, well, you need to talk to Doug Livingston, or the person who can really help you is Darrell Rowland. Even though in many ways those people could answer the people's questions better, but it was insulting both ways. The journalists from out of state didn't want to be turned over to a competitor, but then people in state didn't want to talk to their competitors, right? But that's changing. Mm-hmm. And just the other day I was talking to a reporter, and he said, well, there's some other journalists I could talk to in Ohio. And so I said, well, you sure? Yeah. And they said, yeah. So I gave them a couple of names, and they said, oh, well, they're already in my Rolodex.
So I think the market forces have forced us to adapt, and obviously, like I said at the beginning, we're doing more with less. Hence the ICANN project, relying on funding and polling from a university, the deliberative expertise of a group from Minnesota, and reporters who can hit the pavement in every city or every region in Ohio on the drop of a dime and go out and get the pulse of Ohio.
Yeah, Lloyd, you had a question.
Yes, I have a question for you as well as for Professor Austin in Columbus. My first question is for Doug. Do you guys, how do you guys interview certain people for running for office, like say judicial candidates, like running for Court of Appeals, Supreme Court? Do you have to go to their office and interview them? And my second question is for Professor Austin in Columbus. Last week, Don King went to an event in a Cleveland Heights church with Donald Trump and Pence there. And do you think Don King made the case for Trump, even though I think King was exaggerating about his encounters with Michael Jackson and business dealings like that? So I'll leave it at that.
So the first question is, how is it that you go about interviewing candidates?
It depends on the how much I'm committing to the story. Right now, for the November 8th election, I believe I have 29 candidates that I want to contact. That includes 7 State Board of Education members, some of whom live in Marietta, Ohio, but they have districts that butt into Summit County. I think there's 22. I think there's 8 congressional candidates, and the rest are state house, either Senate or House. It would be very, impractical for me to go and visit all 27 of those folks, let alone, I believe there's a chance that many of them won't even respond to the surveys that I'm going to send out. But for issues of practicality, I'm probably going to send surveys to most of the lawmakers, send a different survey to the State Board of Education members. I know that a couple of the races are going to be tighter, so I might spend a little more time on them. I also have to think about placement in the paper versus placement online. I have limitless real estate online. I can write until I'm blue in the face, and it'll all fit online. In the newspaper, we have limited space, which is something that we have to juggle on a daily basis. So, I will tell candidates that your answers may appear in the paper, but if they're over 100 words, then I'm going to start cutting it at word 101 and so on. For races that I've covered earlier, Rob Portman, Ted Strickland, I've attended events where they're at. Oftentimes the best way to get a hold of somebody that busy is to just walk up to them and start asking questions. Chances are they'll stop, turn around, and speak with you. It's been interesting dealing with the campaigns, trying to set up some of those conversations. They always want to know what you're going to ask. They want to walk you through the interview before you even give it, and sometimes they just want the questions emailed. And we always request a in-face or either on the phone exchange so that we can, respond to some of the answers that they give.
So Jerry, what about Don King?
He and Donald Trump have a lot in common. They're both snake oil salesmen. They remember that Donald King, Trump wanted him to speak at the Republican convention because he was trying to find people that could speak to support him, and that the RNC would not allow Donald King to speak. So he's originally from Cleveland. I used to have a home in Ashtabula, but I don't think he has a following of any kind, and he went to this church that is basically ministered by Donald King, a guy on Donald King's payroll. There were 200 people in the audience. 4 of them were African American, and Donald King got up and endorsed Donald Trump and used the N-word, and that became the story of using the N-word. And so it was a stunt by Donald King to come into a battleground state like Cleveland to show that he had support in the African American community from somebody who was on his payroll. And somebody that's a convicted felon who wouldn't let speak at the convention, and there was nobody in the audience who was African American. So, much ado about nothing.
I have a question for that.
Sure. Go ahead.
In the name of instant news, if you are chasing people who are on the phones all the time, you should be putting out news that are instantaneous, not that could wait for a day